I'm Emily Berg, a board member of the Friends of the Key West Library. Welcome to the fifth presentation in the Friends of the Library 2022 speaker series. This runs every Monday through February. The Friends is a not-for-profit organization separate from the library itself. Our mission is to raise funds for the library and awareness of the library's superb collections and services. Last year, the Friends donated $50,000 to support the library through funds we raised through membership, book sales, this speaker series, and your generous donations. Our speaker series is always free, but we thank you for your donations tonight, which will help in defraying the expenses of this program. If you're not yet a member of the Friends, we invite you to join us. You can do that on our website, friendsofthekeywestlibrary.org. You can also find a link in the chat function throughout the event. Throughout the event tonight, you will have the opportunity to ask questions of the author. And to do that, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Our speaker this evening is Pam Jenoff. Jenoff is the author of several books of historical fiction, including the bestsellers The Orphan's Tale and The Lost Girls of Paris, both of which spent multiple weeks on the New York Times and USA Today bestseller lists. She holds a degree in international affairs from George Washington University and a degree from Cambridge, and she received her JD from UPenn. Her novels are inspired by her experiences working at the Pentagon and as a diplomat for the State Department, handling Holocaust issues in Poland. She lives with her husband and 3 children near Philadelphia. She is joining us remotely from there, where she teaches law. She's with us tonight to discuss her latest book, The Winter Guest. Please help me in welcoming Pam Jenoff.
Hi, Emily. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? It's so nice to see you again.
It is nice to see you, although I look at the bookstore behind you and I'm like, oh, I want to be there.
That's why I do it from here.
It's amazing. I thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I feel so many connections, if I can, before we start, to this event tonight, to the store, which I've had the pleasure of visiting twice now. For the library, I haven't been to your library, but I am a passionate library patron, and here at home I use 5 different library systems pretty much every week. And I also scrolled through the list of participants, and I see many friends here, including Nancy, who I know from Bethany Beach Books up my way, and my elementary school principal, Mr. Cluse, is here. So I'm having a humbling moment. So thank you for having me. Your weather is much better than ours. Go ahead.
Yeah, our weather is much better than most people's. And Nancy, actually, at Bethany Beach Books, she spends her winters down here and volunteers at the bookstore. So
amazing.
Yeah, she's got
blowing kisses.
Yeah. So just to get started, for those of I have my book right here. We've got some more behind us. But for those who haven't read the book yet, The Winter Guest, can you just tell us a little bit about the story and the characters without giving anything away, of course?
I can. So you're testing my memory. This is very funny. When I posted this event, I was like, oh, we're talking about The Woman with the Blue Star, which is my newest book, but has been out since May. But in fact, we're talking about The Winter Guest.
Yes.
So I should say that this is a re-release.
Okay.
The Winter Guest, I'm going to test my memory. I probably know.
I'll help you out. And we can talk about the newest book too, of course.
Well, I'm thinking it's got to be around 2012 or 11, something of that ilk. And the reason I say that is because The Winter Guest is about twin sisters, Helena and Ruth. And I have twins who are now 11, twin girls. And so much of what I was experiencing as I wrote this book was as a mom of newborn twin girls. So I remember the moment when I wrote this. But in the book, Helena and Ruth are twin sisters, and they live in rural Poland, and outside Krakow, south of Krakow. And it's the early days of World War II. And Helena and Ruth are not Jewish. They're sort of an ordinary Polish family in the countryside. But in addition to the hardships of the war, they are raising 3 younger siblings without their parents because their father's been lost, and their mother is sort of permanently hospitalized in Krakow. And so they're already in a very precarious position when one of the sisters, one day in the woods, makes a stunning discovery of a downed American paratrooper. He's wounded, and to make things more complicated, he's Jewish. And so the sister undertakes, unbeknownst to her twin, the task of secretly caring for this American paratrooper, and that, as you can imagine, brings many complications into their lives.
You nailed it.
Thank you.
That's exactly what the book is
testing my
about.
memory there. It's been quite a few. I know people will ask me about my books. I'm like, you've read it more recently than me.
I was going to ask you, was there something that drew you to twins? I didn't realize that you had twins. Are your girls identical like the characters are?
My girls are fraternal, although, they'd love to be able to fool people and switch places, but one is curly, one is straight. They're very they're very different, but they'd love to be. But I do find the twin bond and the twin connection just really fascinating. And of course, at the moment I was writing this, I didn't just have twins. I actually had 3 kids under the age of 2 because my son is just older. And so some of the things that the characters reflect on in the book, like their mother never had enough hands to go around, those were things that I felt very personally from having had twins myself.
Yeah. So that makes sense, the family dynamics of that. But then Poland is another large part of all of your writing, but this book in particular. Can you talk a little bit about your connection to Poland and World War II and your travels there and writing about that?
I would love to. And then I would like to tell you, sort of interestingly, this book, The Winter Guest, the inspiration actually predates my time in Poland. So I'll tell you about that. But I have a very personal connection to Poland. Probably not in all of my books, but in many of my books have some connection to the country. And it comes from the fact that about 26 years ago, I was sent to Krakow as a diplomat for the US State Department. I went over as a first tour diplomat to Krakow. And while I had never planned to go and work on the war, I actually went to stamp visas and passports like junior diplomats do. Poland at that moment had just come out of nearly a half century of communism, where they were cut off from the West and they had no free speech. And so they had many issues from World War II and the Holocaust that they had simply never resolved. And these issues were kind of frozen in time. And when I got to Poland, I'm Jewish, and I went halfway around the world. If you think of 1996, no cell phones really, and no internet at that point. So I was alone around the world with no family. And I had gravitated toward the surviving Jewish community that still lives in Poland. And they had become grandparents to me. And so the US government saw that I had this connection, and they tasked me with working on the Holocaust issues that were outstanding. For 2.5 years, that became my job in a way that was both really rewarding and really challenging and personally transformative. And so I came back from those years in Poland very much wanting to write about it. And on some level, I've been doing so ever since.
It's wonderful. World War II historical fiction is a very popular genre. It's kind of, we could almost have our own section in the store of that. People who gravitate towards it. What do you think it is about World War II? I mean, it's obviously rife with conflict, but other than that, how do you fight not romanticizing it? Because one thing I really love about your work is it's very brutal. It doesn't particularly romanticize the time at all, which I do think some books tend to lean towards.
Absolutely. And when I finish answering this question, will you remind me, because I forgot to tell you about the inspiration for this.
Yes,
I do want to share that, but let's talk World War II first. So I'm going to start, I should warn you, and this is going to scare people off in the Q&A, but because I teach law school, my answers are very long, so I apologize in advance. But I'll tell you an anecdote, which is some years ago, I looked at World War II. It was right after 2 of the greatest World War II novels of our time came out, which I think are The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna and All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, these great, great books. And I had this moment of pause where I said, is World War II done? Because no one can do it better than those two, you know, and maybe people are sick of it. And then I looked at the New York Times bestseller list, and setting those books aside, I think like 4 of the top 15 books were still World War II. So clearly there was this appetite. But more importantly, we should ask why, right? Why there's this appetite. And I'd like to share a few thoughts that I've had. One is that after communism ended and that wall sort of fell, there's these archives of material from the East that were simply not available to us before. And I suspect that that has brought about many stories. And secondly, the generation of survivors is really getting up there in years. And so I think there's a genuine impetus to capture and tell those stories in any form that we can. And then the last piece is, that what I want to do as an author is I want to take my reader, I want to take you, and I want to put you in the shoes of my protagonist. And I want you to ask, what would I have done? And World War II has just such stark choices and dire circumstances that it's really fertile ground for storytelling. And I just want to say, in addition to not romancing, it's very important to me to do it respectfully. It is a daunting task, and I have been stopped in my tracks more than once. But when I find a book idea, one of the first questions always is, can I do this in a respectful, almost reverent way for the people who lived through that most difficult era? Because if the answer is no, I won't go any further.
Yeah. I thought many times, what would I have done in this position? And I really think I would have just curled up and died.
Well, thank you, Emily, because I have to tell you, I always say when people talk about the war and like who did what, I say, wait a minute, I am not a brave human. Like, I think Dorothy should have stayed in Oz because it was easier than fighting her way back. And so I certainly wouldn't have helped the Germans, but I don't know that I would have been a hero, especially now that I have children. I might have hidden in my basement for 5 years,
Right.
And so one thing that's really important to me in writing this history is that I don't like to write the black and white history I learned in school. I want people to understand that history is made up of an infinite number of individual decisions that people made.
And I did find it very interesting with the sister. What I was able to kind of put myself into with the sisters and their choices is it's almost a little bit like, I don't know if you've ever been down here during a hurricane, but it's like,
I know where you're going.
Well, this thing is coming and it could turn at any minute and go somewhere else and go back into the ocean. Like, you really don't know how serious it is until it's right here. And then sometimes it's too late to leave. And that's why people end up staying and not evacuating, because there is a window of when we can get out.
Yeah.
And the hope that it's going to turn, because 9 out of 10 times it does. And you don't want to leave your home. I mean, the thought of leaving your home is hard. So we'll just wait and wait and wait, but then it's too late. So it's almost not about being brave. It's just like getting to the point where you don't really have a choice. Like, because they talk a lot about hiding. Should we hide? Should we hide?
Mm-hmm.
But then it's too late to hide in some cases.
This was actually a fascinating theme in my newer book, The Woman with the Blue Star. So this book, and I don't want to go too far afield because we have so much to talk about with The Winter Guest, it was inspired by a true story of a group of Jewish people who survived World War II by hiding in a sewer for 14 months. And it's this unbelievable but very real story that inspired my book. And when people say, well, how did they do that? Like, how could they survive for a year? I always think about what we all went through in 2020. And I'm not suggesting that COVID was anywhere near the Holocaust. That's not the comparison. But does anyone remember 2 weeks to flatten the curve? Like, we all thought we were going to be home for 2 weeks, not 6 or 8 months. And so people during the war, they were living in real time. And these people, like, they thought they were going down there for a couple hours and then a couple days and a couple weeks. And I don't think if they had known the magnitude at the outset, they could have possibly, managed that.
Right. Well, and that was true with Anne Frank as well, and didn't know how long she'd be up there.
Yeah.
And just like Anne Frank, and just like in your newer book and in this book, the people hiding or the people who were injured, somebody needed to help. Mm-hmm. And so if just getting back to The Winter Guest, that is Well, actually, you know what? We're getting off topic. Tell us about what the
Oh,
influence
I
for
tell
this
you.
book was.
So I have to tell you, for the winter guest, I never have books with me, so this is why I'm like, woo! um, so before I went to the State Department, I spent a year at the Pentagon, and I must tell you this story. So how I came to be at the Pentagon when I was like 23 years old. When I was an undergraduate in college in Washington, D.C., I had to put myself through school. So I couldn't take any unpaid internships or anything. I worked as a messenger for a law firm, literally rode around DC in taxis delivering packages, which was a great way to see Washington happen. But years later, when I was in England, I discovered that my boss from the firm had become the Secretary of the Army. And I wrote to him and I said, can I come work for you, when I come back? And I wound up as his special assistant. And the reason I'm telling you this story is I spent a year as the special assistant to the Secretary of the Army. And it was this incredible year where, to paraphrase Sir Isaac Newton, I saw the world from the shoulders of giants. And so amazing things, horrible things, amazing things. I was at Oklahoma City 3 days after the bombing, and all sorts of things I'll never forget. But that year was the 50th anniversary of World War II. And there were commemorations that my boss was to attend all around the world, and I got to go with him. So we went to the Philippines and we went to Bastogne, and there was this incredible commemoration I'll never forget. And it was in the foothills of Slovakia. So you're south of Poland then, over the border. And it was a cabin high up in the woods, where a young Slovak girl had hidden the partisans and the paratroopers, and she had aided them during World War II. And this was the story that stuck with me, of how she had hidden them high in the mountain cabin, that I learned at the Pentagon, even before I went to Poland, that became the inspiration for The Winter Guest.
Wow. So have you found that with your work, it often starts with one story like that? I mean, with the new book, that's the case too. And then you branch out, or how does...
Well, I will say that these days, at least, when I want to write a book, I actually go looking for an idea. And the idea is I'm looking for, what I call the gasp. Like, because if I find something that makes me gasp after 25 or 26 years of working with the war, I'm hopeful that readers will feel the same way. And so there's always this true historical moment that serves as the gasp. However, I want to be very clear. I write historical fiction. And so while I have an inspiration, I do not seek to write the stories of actual people. I feel that they are not mine to tell. And so I worry that writers, sometimes we get in trouble if we stake too large a claim around what is real in our book. So I will take the inspiration and I will endeavor to be true to the timeline and kind of the setting, but the story I write is in itself fiction.
So do you do quite a bit of research? It's clear you do a lot of research, but do you do any research on the inspiration, or do you leave that to the end?
Oh, no, I research the inspiration. I read the stories, the actual stories, and then I develop my story from there. For example, in The Woman with the Blue Star, there were actually people who lived in that sewer. And there's a wonderful nonfiction book called In the Sewers of Lviv. And I believe the author is Robert Marshall. And in that book, they talked all about the real people. So I did not write those people's stories, but I learned a lot from that book about, like, how big were the sewer pipes and how did they get water and those sorts of things.
Interesting. Can you tell us a little bit more about your time at the State Department, or would you have to kill us?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
I'm just very interested in, especially because you're a lawyer too, like lawyers that can write beautiful prose and like kind of take these huge ideas and put them into something that's enjoyable to read, even if it is dark.
Yes.
So yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
About the State Department part.
How that kind of branched off into writing fiction.
Oh, sure. Let me tell you my story, my path to publication story, and this might answer it. I came back from Poland in 1998, and I did not continue on with the State Department. I actually went to law school at that point. I was sort of like, want to be in the States, need something marketable, So I went to law school, but I was really moved and changed by the time I had spent in Poland, and the people I had met, met and just how it had affected me. I spent every day when I lived in Poland trying to be appropriately solemn in light of what had happened there, but not having my own life become a graveyard. And so I came back very moved and changed, and I knew I was going to write about it. And I knew it was going to be a novel. And you may wonder how I knew that. Well, Emily probably knows this, and I'll say why. Going back even further in time, I always wanted to be a writer. It was never short stories. It was never poems. It was always books. And I say Emily probably knew that because I walked into books and books, and I lost it because my fifth grade yearbook said the next Judy Blume. And I walked into books and books and met Judy. And so it was all over for me, that was like the biggest moment of my life. But so I had always wanted to be a novelist. That was my dream. But all through those years of going to school and living abroad, I had time to write. Like I really did, and I could never get started. And I bet everyone on this Zoom sort of is nodding, because I guarantee you all have a project in your closet that you would like to get off the ground that's kind of stuck. For me, that was the novel. The turning point in my life was actually 9/11. I had come back from the State Department and I went to law school, graduated law school, and I started practicing law on September 4th, 2001. It was a Tuesday. And 1 week later, exactly, 9/11 happened. And I hope you'll forgive me for using sort of a flip expression about a serious day, but I had a life epiphany that I call, "Dear God, I don't want to die at the law firm." And so what I meant was that being a lawyer is a fine and admirable profession. I love the law. I teach at Rutgers. I make baby lawyers for my day job, right? But I had this other dream, this deep dream of being a novelist. And if I had been a 9/11 victim, I never would have realized that dream. So it was that mortality moment, and it said, like, I have to get started right away. I took a course at Temple Night School in Philadelphia, and the course was called Write Your Novel This Year. That's a true story. I later looked, and they now call it Write Your Novel This Month, and I would not have I would not have taken that, but I took Write Your Novel This Year, and I started writing, and I was working on a project. I had an opening scene in my mind of a woman walking a child across Krakow's main market square. And anyone who's familiar might recognize it as sort of the opening scene in my first book, The Commandant's Girl. So that was my journey to starting writing. But before I go on too much longer, Emily, I have to say two things. It was not a hop, skip, and a jump from my epiphany to books and books. It was, in fact, 5 years and 39 publisher rejections until the last known publisher on earth, I should stop calling them that because they're my current publisher, they made an offer for my first book. Now things have gone okay, and some people in publishing act like they knew it all along. I have rejection letters in my closet over there from all of them. I still have the original 39 rejections.
You kept them. That's smart.
I have them. I don't, what someone said, it's my psyche. I don't keep, if I hit the list in the New York Times or I get a nice ad in the paper, I actually don't save those, but I save the rejection letters.
Well, that's interesting, because they're more motivating, or because you want to use them when they come crawling back?
No, you know what? I don't get too hung up on the good stuff. I don't know why I keep the other stuff, but I don't want to get hung up on the good stuff. So anyway, the other thing I want to tell you about becoming a serious writer was that even though I had this great epiphany, I was also a new attorney at a big city law firm, and I had to repay $1,000 a month in student loan debt. So I could not go sit in a castle and write these books. I had to coexist with my day job. So I wrote the books from 5 to 7 in the morning every day for many years. I now have 3 kids, 13 and under, and I have 5 pets: dog, cat, bird, lizard, and rabbit. And so I don't always get 5 to 7 in the morning, but that was how I did it. So that's the long and winding path to publication.
Wow. Yeah, I don't have kids, but I just with the pets alone, I know it would be difficult.
All right. Well, forget the other 4 pets. I'm going to be honest. My husband takes care of the other 4 pets. I only take care of the dog. It was a pandemic puppy, and I actually think having a dog was almost career ending because of the work. And so doggy daycare, I'm not even kidding, is a huge thing with writers. I've had conversations with multiple writers that when I have to work, the dog goes to daycare.
Yeah, because
You
he's
know,
needy a little bit.
pandemic dogs, you can't leave them home alone. You know that.
Well, let's shift into the pandemic a little bit and writing. So aside from the dog, I mean,
Yes.
you clearly did get some writing done during the pandemic.
I'm going to tell
Right?
you about my cold water dive into the pandemic and then the biggest lesson I got out of it.
Please.
So, okay. So I was working on The Woman with the Blue Star all through 2019. I was like working on it, turn it into my editor in November of 19. And this is my 11th book. And my editor says, no. I was like, no. She's like, no. And I had written a total stinker of a first draft. I turned in this dreadful book. So I had to rewrite the whole book in 5 months, which I never hoped to do again. And I said, all right, I'm going to make lemonade out of lemons, and I'm going to go to Poland for a research trip because I hadn't gone yet. I hadn't been back in 17 years. So I booked myself a really nice mom only trip to Poland with the good airfare and the good hotel.
Hmm.
And I was leaving on March 11th, 2020.
Oh
So
dear.
now you all look at your virtual planners in your head and you go, oh, and as COVID started to bubble up, my editor said, we don't think you should go to Poland. And I was like, I am going to Poland and I'm going to wear one of those mask things because we didn't know what that was. So the flights all shut down on March 11th. And thank goodness they did. I had an emergency appendectomy on March 12th. I would have been in the air over Poland, and I never got to go for this book. Thankfully, I was able to pivot, and my good friends in the U.S. consulate and JCC Krakow made all those meetings virtual for me, right as their own city was shutting down. So the interesting part related to COVID was two things. One, I came home from the hospital and we never left the house again. The schools had shut down, everything shut down. And all of a sudden, I couldn't write. I had all the kids home and I had the puppy, all this stuff, and I froze for like 4 or 5 months. And then fall came. The kids went on virtual school. The puppy went to daycare, and I sat down and started writing again. And it was like the best moment ever. And it made me realize that sometimes we, and I'm going to say especially women, but I'm generalizing, apologize, make excuses for, and feel guilty for our work. And for me, it's such an important part of the self-care piece is actually working that I really learned not to give it short shrift from the pandemic. And of course, the other interesting piece was I was writing a book about people who were living in isolation and seeking human connection right as we were doing the very same thing. So it was a very interesting experience.
Did you feel that, especially recovering from an illness and then going into the pandemic, did it change? I mean, it changed your outlook on it. Do you think it changed the final product in your writing?
I don't know if it did. I will tell you one other very interesting parallel, because I've mentioned a few of them that I felt very acutely when I was writing a book about these people who were hiding in a sewer and we were in our houses during COVID. Again, nowhere near as bad. But, my character in that book, her mother, one day they were living in a modern apartment and the next day she was trying to help her family survive in the sewer. And while we went through nothing like that, I'm going, certainly in spring of 2020, I never expected to be asking myself questions like, can I get toilet paper? And can I get meat? And how am I going to educate my children? And so that feeling that life can change so drastically in an instant, I certainly felt while I was rewriting that particular book.
Yeah. So other than your time in Poland as a diplomat, had you gone back for other books, or was that going to be your
So
first time?
I had not been back since 2003. So I should say not all my books are set in Poland. The Orphan's Tales like France and Germany, The Last Summer at Chelsea Beach is the United States. And so there's different places, but a huge chunk of my heart, Poland, like Eastern Europe, I really feel it there. I've always felt this like instant connection kind of to the land there, as strange as that sounds. And so I had desperately wanted to go back, but my wings have just been clipped in recent years. And so fortunately, there are a wealth of ways you can research, whether it's memoir, correspondence, periodicals, photos, maps, and, I had a sewer expert in Krakow who, helped me remotely, but I do owe myself that trip to Poland.
And you speak Polish, I'm assuming.
I do. When the State Department assigns you to a country, they give you language training. And so I sat in a classroom in Arlington, Virginia with 3 other people and did nothing but learn Polish for like 9 months as my
Oh,
job, which is really hard. But then I went over there and I stood on the visa line and interviewed 100 people a day. And so I understand Polish. I've just always had a terrible American accent, and probably in, a New Jersey-ish accent, or maybe sort of like Mayor of Easttown. I'm not sure.
um, that's very interesting. So, okay, so I'm getting a little off topic.
Oh, it's so good. I'm having a conversation. I feel like I'm in the store.
Yeah, no, I wish you were. It would be
Next
great.
time, I want to come back. I want to go out to dinner again.
I know it would be. What year were you here?
I was there in 19. I was with you all in April of 19 was
Oh,
when I was there.
it's
Yeah.
funny because like everything pre-pandemic I think of is like, I don't know,
So
12
different.
years ago or something.
It's really different, isn't it?
Yeah, I've completely lost. I mean, everybody says it every day, but I have lost all track of time. Just as a reminder too, because we're kind of coming up on where we can take some Q&A from the audience. If you guys do have questions for Pam, please put them in the Q&A portion. It should be at the very bottom there of your screen. And we will get to those in just a couple minutes. But I guess, can you tell us what you're working on now without, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot or give too much away. But.
No, I love to. I'm largely an open book on these things. So the historical inspiration for my new book had to do with the only known sabotage of a train headed to Auschwitz. So there was a train going from Belgium to the camps, and there were some people who broke into that train in an attempt to rescue people. And so my book contains many other elements, but in part it looks at fictitiously both people on the train and people who were doing the sabotaging. So that's what I've been working on. It should be out in early 2023. I don't have a title for you yet. We're still wrestling with titles. All I will say is that 2023 may sound a little bit far away to you all, but it sounds terrifyingly soon to me. I'm way late on this book. And normally I'm a 5 a.m. writer, which I hate, which I love. Right now I'm a 4 a.m. writer, and I hate 4 a.m. 4 a.m. is terrible. So it'll be done soon.
Well, you said you had a bad first draft of the most recent book, which probably your bad first draft is better than most people's.
It's pretty bad.
But how many drafts do you typically do? A lot, do you feel?
It's really hard to quantify, and can I tell you why? You've probably heard this, Emily. There's two types of writers: plotters, and they're the dear souls who write chronologically. They make everything look nice before they move on.
Outline, yeah.
Not me. I'm a pantser, and a pantser means you write by the seat of your pants. And so I turn on a computer and I go, blah. It's inspired by a really good book by Natalie Goldberg called Writing Down the Bones. She takes a Zen Buddhist approach to writing where you just let it all come out. It's actually called, hope nobody's eating dinner. It's actually called throwing up on the page. You go, blah. And so it's the worst way to write a book. The editing is forever, but it's the only way I can do it. And the reason I tell you that is it would be really hard for me to quantify drafts. You know what I mean? Because when you're a pantser, the whole book gets finished at once. Like my editor will say, can I have chapters? I'm like, no, like it's all done at the same time. There are many drafts later after she's read it and I get the feedback and we go back and forth. And I've started doing an outline for her because even though I'm a pantser, I never want to rewrite a whole book in 5 months again. So I'm trying to do that a little bit better. But that's my process largely.
We have a local playwright author here, and he puts letters to his drafts. So he says he goes A, B, C, D, and then he'll go all the way to double letters.
Oh goodness!
And so every time he comes in, I say, "What are you on?" He says, "I'm on O," and then I'll go to P, or I'm on SS. But
I don't know. I mean, I do every day when I'm working. I save as, and I save it with a new date extension so that I have a new version. I don't believe in overwriting because there's always something you want to go back and see. So that I do. And then of course there's huge edits. Like I am not one of those writers who turns in a practically perfect manuscript. I only get to so far before I need that kind of intervention from my editor.
Have you had the same editor on a lot of your work?
It's really interesting. I started with the publisher that's now my publisher. Like I'm back with them. And I had sort of a journey in between. And I've been back with them for a long time. And it's this amazing love fest. And so many of the people are the same as when I started out back in, say, 2005 or something like that. So it's really a very amazing team. I switched editors at one point. I'm still very good friends with my old editor, who I refer to as the woman who made all my dreams come true. But I have a wonderful editor. I'm very lucky, and a wonderful team.
Oh, great. Well, I think we'll probably, see if we have some questions from the audience. I'm going to ask Marcia Williams to join us as board member and going to be facilitating our Q&A. Hi, Marcia.
Hi. Hello. Thank you, Pam. This has been very interesting. And thank you, Emily, for such good questions. So we have a few questions. A couple of them are related to your profession as, excuse me, there goes a plane over here. Related to your profession as a law professor. I wonder how that works with such lovely descriptive writing that you have, or is that your creative outlet? Because it just seems, such an interesting juxtaposition.
Well, there's actually a great deal of synergy between law writing and fiction writing. There's actually a really great deal of synergy on those. So what my fiction writing can bring to my law, I teach law school, actually, I don't practice law right now, but fiction writing brings to my law school classroom, for example, I teach legal writing. And so one of the things it brings to my classroom is I can bring techniques to my students. I teach them to not stop writing. I teach them to not stop their hand and to get those words out there on the page. I can teach them, I have an exercise I call Know Yourself as a Writer. And so all of those things from my novel writing, I can bring to my students who are just amazing. And then what my law background gave to my fiction writing is actually the ability to revise. Because when you are a junior attorney in a big organization, people like mark up your work, right? And they want you to fix it. And I feel that way about being a novelist. That's people don't, my editor, who's amazing, doesn't always, sometimes she gives me the solution, but a lot of times people just give you the problem and you have to figure out how to fix that problem in a way that is like organic to your work. You know what I mean? So I think that there's a really good synergy. Plus, being a writer is very solitary, and teaching law school gives me a lot of human interaction. And I teach at Rutgers, and my students are the most amazing, hardworking, unentitled students on the planet. And it's a spectacular pleasure to help them get wherever they're going.
Oh, that's great. Okay, here's another question from our listeners. Which authors have influenced your writing the most? And where do you have time to sleep? It seems that you are doing everything from, raising 3 kids, 5 animals, teaching, getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. How do you do it?
Well, before I get to the writers that specifically have influenced me with the books, I get to fell about Judy because, I was, as I said, in 5th grade, it said the next Judy Blume. And when I was an aspiring author, I wrote her an email in like 1998. This is the early days of email. And she wrote back to me. And I still have that email because I still have the same account. So when I walked into the store on July, whatever it was, of 2000, I think that time I was here was 2018. And I kind of lost my mind. I told my kids that this is better than when the Eagles won the Super Bowl. Like, it was a very big moment. I went back and I looked, and the email she had graciously written me was exactly 20 years earlier to the day. It was the same day. So it was this incredible moment of kismet. So I owe a great deal of debt to her and the other childhood writers that inspired me profoundly. Then as I got older, I did read a lot of historical fiction. So think back, it was sort of these big books. And oddly, they were mostly by men at that point, right? So that was Herman Wouk and Leon Uris and James Michener and John Jakes and all that, the big historical fiction. There were some really good Holocaust World War II books for young adults that I don't think are in print anymore that had a really profound impact on me. When I became a writer, as I said, Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones was a really big book for me. And I must say, there are a wealth of writers today who are very generous and very supportive of other writers. And many are women, although not exclusively. But I've been the beneficiary of so many supportive writers who have sort of, after making it, like thrown the ladder back down. So I'm going to leave people out, but I'm talking about people like Kristen Hanna and Jodi Picoult and Christina Baker Klein and Mary Kay Andrews. And I'm missing so many people when I say that, but they've all had that impact on my career. That was a really long answer, but I will attempt the second question, which is, how do I get this done? I do too many things and none of them well, which is, I mean, I'm being a little facetious there. I really only do a few things. I mom, I teach, and I write, and I go to bed, and that's it. As I've gotten older, I very much take solace in staying in my lane. Like, I don't make anything look nice, as you can tell. It's just, I haven't cooked since the first Obama administration, so I don't do that. And so I really just kind of focus on those things, and it's just a labor of love because, if I hit Powerball, I don't have time to play Powerball, but if I hit Powerball, I would still mom, write, and teach. I would just do them a little slower. So how do I do it specifically? My mom lives a mile down the road. My husband has always been able to juggle babies. Anne Lamott once said that before children, she couldn't write if there were dirty dishes in the sink. And after children, she could write if there was a corpse in the sink. And I take that very, very much to heart.
Well, that's very interesting because I've always loved the statement of, can women have it all? And I always used to say they can, just not all at the same time. So you do have to pick and choose the things that you concentrate on. So that's really good. I was wondering, since you haven't been able to get back to Krakow and Poland, have you kept up with any of the descendants of the Jewish community there?
I am still very close to my friends in Poland. These people, both Jewish and non-Jewish, I want to say, and they opened their homes and their hearts to me. And I certainly didn't want to walk away at the end of it. So a few of the survivors I was closest to, including the cantor in Krakow and a man known as the Last Klezmer, he was a musician. They have both passed away, but they were 100 when they passed away. So it was a really amazing thing. There are still people there I'm very close to. I'm close to my Polish friends, and thank goodness for social media to keep in touch. But I have a great anecdote for you. Several years ago, I'm going to say 2015-ish or something, I was going to work. And when I got to work, I looked at Facebook and I saw a post from the US consulate in Krakow, Poland. And it said, oh, look, they're making Pam Jenoff's The Diplomat's Wife into a movie here in Krakow. And I stopped. I said, wait a minute, we didn't sell the movie rights. Like, what on earth are they talking about? So I picked up the phone and I called the consulate in Krakow. And I haven't been there in 25 years, but the person answered the phone was someone I knew. And I said, what's going on? Like, what's this post on Facebook about my movie? And you know what she said to me? April Fools. Oh. It was April 1st and they had punked me. And I was so flattered that they thought to do that all of those years later. So it's still a very special place to me. I need to go back.
So speaking of that, has anyone approached you about making any of your books into movies?
Well, it's funny. If you had asked me that a few years ago, I would have said from your mouth to God's ears, because it had never happened. But my one book that is optioned, I'm very grateful to Emily for the lovely display of my books behind her there. I see them. The Lost Girls of Paris, which was my book before The Woman with the Blue Star, my 10th book. It's a story about women who served in Britain's special operations executive and the betrayal that led to many of their deaths. It's a fictitious accounting of that. That was optioned for film. That option has since been changed over to a made-for-TV limited run series because we're all at home now. Last summer, I had the chance to Zoom with the screenwriter, and I was supposed to be giving her information, but screenwriters are so smart about plot and things that I care about that as she was talking, I was scribbling notes furiously. So I'm really hopeful that if anybody has the potential to bring this project to life, it'll be this particular screenwriter.
So that would be good. Hopefully you won't have to wait as long as Judy's waited to get the movie made for Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret.
I know. I'm so excited for that.
Aren't we all?
I'm so excited for that.
Okay, well, I think we have all of our questions answered. Emily, do you have any other things to ask Pam?
No, just wanted to say thank you, Pam, so much for being with us and talking about this book. And when the next book comes out, you can come back and talk about the last book. We'll always be one behind.
In person. I'm coming back in person. This is the thing. My whole family, we are big Key West people. My husband lived there for a time. We visited, and it's first on our list to come back. So I will come back again, and thank you. And I just want to say that I really do encourage everyone to stay in touch wherever you're hanging out online, whether that's email, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you're hanging out. I don't really get into politics. It's books and maybe a little mom stuff. So please find me so we can continue the conversation.
Okay, so we do have another question coming. As soon as you say no more questions, then someone thinks
That's
of
okay. I'm all yours.
someone. So, Bob, are you going to take that over, or who's going to take that over? Oh, John Clues, your principal.
My elementary school principal for my whole time in elementary school.
Absolutely. He says he always knew you would be somebody special and make your way.
Well, thank you so much. It is so grateful and humbling to have you here. And I already told my mom, and she's thrilled. She's so excited. So
Well, that's great. That's great. And again, we thank you so much for spending your time with us.
Thank you. Be safe, everybody.
We should say that thanks everyone for coming. Books are available for purchase at Books and Books, but also they are available through distribution at the Key West Public Library. Our next Zoom event will be with Charlene Harris, which is on February 21st. We do have an event next week on February the 14th with Meg Cabot at the Tropic Cinema. I do believe that is sold out, but check our friends of the keywestlibrary.org for information and to possibly sign up for standby for that. Thank you all for being here, and we will see you next time.